In the earlier days of YouTube, the online debate in large part was about debating the topic of religion. After 9/11, the new atheists came onto the scene to spur on a departure from religious belief, and on the other side, religious apologists came armed with philosophical arguments for the existence of God.
Number one, the cosmological argument. The question of why anything at all exists is the most profound question of philosophy. The philosopher Derek Parfit says, "No question is more sublime than why there is a universe, why there is anything, rather than nothing."
Of course, for the most part, the atheist community that formed online found tons of problems with these arguments, and the consensus nowadays is that the fight over the truth of religion is largely over, and that the culture war has moved on to issues like feminism and transgender rights. And sure enough, a new wave of right-wingers have stepped up to spearhead the arguments for the right. People like Ben Shapiro, Stefan Molyneux, Jordan Peterson, and Dennis Prager, whose YouTube channel regularly gets millions of views on their videos. For the purposes of this video, I will refer to these people as the new right. Despite the fact that some people think that the argument over religion is over, I disagree. I've noticed that the new right still consistently argues for religion even today. However, what separates the new right from the old right in terms of religion is that, unlike the apologists I showed you earlier, they no longer try and argue that religion is probably true. Instead, they argue that we need religion, namely, without a belief in God and religion, we'll lose free will, morality, and meaning, and society will fall apart.
The bottom line is that without the belief that there is a purpose to the universe, without a belief that there is a purpose to your life, without a belief that you have the capacity to make individual choices, it's very difficult to build a civilization. By difficult, I mean impossible. There
have been some who have made videos responding to these individual claims, but I wanted to do a video that would respond to these claims and then tie them all together, because the way that the new right argues for religion, I think, is meant to support some very pernicious aspects of right-wing thought that I will discuss near the end. Part 1. Free will. The people on the new right that I am responding to believe that God is necessary for us to have free will, and that free will is necessary to have a justice system, and that a justice system is needed for a functioning society.
The point that I'm making here is that you're right, free will is at the center of the criminal justice system. Yeah. I believe that the argument in favor of free will has to rest on supernatural premises. Because otherwise, what you're basically saying is that human beings are a combination of their genetics and their environment. And if we just had a giant machine and we could pour all that information into a machine, then I could predict with perfect certainty what you were going to say next. If I had all that information, then I could perfectly predict that, and then you wouldn't have any personal responsibility.
The problem for atheists when it comes to if they're right is that all of civilization breaks down almost immediately if you apply the principle.
Exactly.
Because if you believe
and meaning in life.
I mean, just on a deterministic basis. I mean, if you're a true atheist, you believe that if we had a giant computer and we could feed all information about biology and physics into a computer, I could predict down to, literally the millisecond when you're going to take the next puff on that cigar.
That's correct, yes.
And so then there's no personal responsibility for anything. No matter what sort of crime is committed, how can you attribute responsibility? People can't live like that. You can't have a society built on the idea that nobody's responsible for their actions because it's self-defeating. I think reason basically turned into, okay, we're going to follow to the logical endpoint all of the non-religious bases of human thought. And once you do that, it's very difficult not to fall into a sort of self-refuting trap about human thought. You're just a set of neurons that are firing. Neurons don't have responsibility. Your dog doesn't have responsibility. Do you have responsibility? You are a product of your environment and your biology. Does that carry with it any sort of moral responsibility? You don't have the capacity to choose. If you don't have the capacity to choose, how do you have moral responsibility?
I also don't see any evidence whatsoever that a society can exist that functions over any reasonable period of time in any reasonable manner without predicating itself on the belief that people are both capable of free will and that they're responsible. And so the fact that it seems to be impossible to build a functioning society or even functioning dyadic relationships for that matter, in the absence of the presupposition of free will and the capacity for voluntary change, indicates to me some evidence for the existence of those capacities.
Wow, so without God, civilization will break down. Luckily for us, our friends on the right are wrong about this. Let me explain. Whether or not a criminal had free will in leading up to their crime, rewards and punishments are still warranted. Let's go through the example of a bank robber. In a deterministic scenario, we would look at the motives of the robber and the process of reasoning that he went through. This would include the mental calculations that he made when considering the stakes at hand. For example, leading a life of crime would have the following risks and rewards. The rewards are a quick and bountiful supply of money with little effort. The risks, however, include social ostracization, injury, death, and most relevant, the potential loss of freedom. You see, punishments for robbing banks or any other crime is still warranted because the punishments that a society sets up will function in everyone's line of reasoning whenever they get the temptation to rob a bank. I think most of us at some point have contemplated robbing a bank, but those thoughts are immediately stamped out as soon as we consider it because we also have information on hand that the downsides to robbing a bank will most probably be much worse than any possible benefits it would give us. When somebody robs a bank, they're aware of these punishments as well, which is why you never see people who are very well off rob banks. When someone is desperate enough, the potential rewards will begin to outweigh the possible punishments, and that desperate person will proceed to make the choice to rob a bank. Punishments are justified even if there is no free will because punishments are what affect the pro versus con calculations that everyone makes when contemplating moral choices. To prevent bank robberies, create a society where there is too little to gain and too much to lose when robbing a bank. The same goes for any other behavior that society wants to promote or prevent. Think about a time when you had to contemplate a moral choice. Do you really think that you made this choice free from outside influences? Think about it. To make a moral choice, you had to reflect on your life experiences, your ideals and principles, and weigh the benefits and downsides of each possible choice that you had. And when you made your choice, you went with the option that you reasoned would have the least downsides and the most upsides, in that which aligned with your moral beliefs at the time. Now let me ask you, did you have a choice but to reason based on what you already knew? Is it possible to reason based on knowledge and insights that you don't have? Try and think about every moral belief that you hold. Now, think about why it is that you hold those beliefs, and you should be able to find that you believe everything you do for a reason, and there are reasons behind those reasons. For example, you may believe that abortion is wrong because it's what your religion teaches, and you believe what your religion teaches because it's what your parents taught to you. And you believe your parents because they're usually honest, and you believe they're usually honest because so on and so on. In order to demonstrate the kind of free will that Shapiro and company are talking about here, they need to demonstrate an instance where they reasoned completely independently from outside influences. Has there ever been a case where someone made a decision completely free from outside influences? How can you reason but reason based on what you already understand and believe to be true? If you think about it, having the kind of free will that these guys are talking about would quickly put an end to rationality, and I'll discuss that point more at the end. Although they won't work for everyone, most of us are held back by punishments that we agree on. For most of us, the punishments set up by the societies we live in are enough to mold the way we behave, and the fact that these deterrents work at all is an argument against free will, not for it. Because they are an example of imposing outside influences to influence the way we make our choices. Now, that was all pretty complex stuff in a short amount of time, so if you didn't get that all immediately, that's fine, because believe it or not, Shapiro and company's idea of God is even worse for free will than any independent argument I could make. You see, all the guys I'm responding to here advocate for the God of the Abrahamic religions, well, except they try to exclude Islam for obvious reasons, but nonetheless, the God most commonly described as being omnipotent and omniscient with perfect knowledge of all there is, all there has been, and all there will be. And what's more is that this God has already planned everything out with perfect precision. Now, I think most of you already know where I'm going with this when I say that the type of free will that these guys are advocating for cannot possibly exist under this God model. If this God knows with perfect knowledge everything that's going to happen, how can you have free will? If God already knows and in fact planned everything, can you possibly act any different from how God planned for you to act? In order to have free will, you would need to be able to essentially make God wrong about his plan. Perfect omniscience and omnipotence cannot coexist with libertarian free will. Something has to go. Now, there are objections to the arguments that I just proposed, and they usually go like this. Since God has perfect knowledge, he can know everything you're going to do because he understands you and your surroundings so well that he can predict with perfect accuracy, and he just knows what you're going to do, like a parent knows what their child is going to do when choosing between candy and vegetables. In that way, even though God knows everything we're going to do, we can still have free will. However, I don't see the difference between that and what Ben says here.
Because otherwise, what you're basically saying is that human beings are a combination of their genetics and their environment. And if we just had a giant machine and we could pour all that information into a machine, then I could predict with perfect certainty what you were going to say next. Right? As it is, my machine's great. I can mostly predict what you're going to say next. But if I had all that information, then I could perfectly predict that, and then you wouldn't have any personal responsibility.
Finally, let's assume that what the new right says about God is true, that when there is a God and a supernatural aspect to reality, we can have free will, and that this free will justifies punishment for those who do wrong, because they did their crimes under their own free will. However, this implies something very disturbing. Under this model of reality, victims of horrible crimes like rape and murder have their own free will, yet when they are victims of these crimes, their free will not to be raped, not to be murdered, are violated, and instead, the free will of those who want to rape and murder are upheld and preserved over the free will of their victims. If the new right really believes in libertarian free will for all, they are living in a world where, in practice, the freedom of the evil is given precedent over the innocent, all by God's design. By the way, this is a minor point, but does God have free will? Does he have perfect foreknowledge of everything he's going to do? Can you have perfect foreknowledge of everything you're going to do in the future and still have free will? Food for thought if you believe like these guys do. Part 2. Morality. We all know this one, right? Without God, anything is permissible. With God, we can have a rationally justified source for morality. This is not a new claim by any means, but it is one of the most persistent, so let's hear it from how the new right puts it.
If I asked you how you know that the Earth is round, you would show me photographs from outer space or offer me measurable data. But what photographs could you show? What measurements could you provide that prove that murder or rape or theft is wrong? The fact is, you can't. There are scientific facts, but without God, there are no moral facts. In a secular world, there can only be opinions about morality. They may be personal opinions or society's opinions, but only opinions.
If God doesn't say murder is wrong, if there is no God declaring murder wrong, then murder isn't wrong. You can think it's wrong, feel it's wrong, vote it being wrong, intuit it being wrong, but there's no wrong with a capital W. It's wrong in the same way that I would say a BMW is better than a Mercedes. It's my subjective take, and that's all it is.
Strikes me, if ethics are sort of the reason why we are human, what differentiates us from animals, and I think there's a very strong case to be made for that. I mean, every animal builds a house, we just build more complicated ones. But as far as abstract, conceptualized, universalized virtue, that is what distinguishes us from the animals. There is something inhuman about relativism because it lowers us back down to amoral, manipulative resource gatherers and resource shifters. And that, to me, is a very chilling thing. We can't restrain ourselves anymore by internalized moral rules, and therefore we get this hysterical shaming and attacking and bullying and so on, because we all have to make decisions as a society and individually. Who gets what? How do resources get created or shared or transferred? When you take out the certainty about property rights, when you take out the certainty of free will and self-ownership, when you ascribe all human causality to environmental factors, then you turn into this almost satanic manipulator of the environment in order to create the perfect human being, and you strip people of moral responsibility, of conscience, of free will. And this is, to me, a morally insane viewpoint. And strips us of that which is most essential in our humanity, which is ethics and free will.
Even though the New York Times writers constantly speak about poverty in the Arab world as a major fuel of terror, the truth is it has nothing to do. Islamic terror has nothing to do with poverty.
Oh no, Bin Laden and co. were all came from wealthy families and had great educations and lots of material opportunities. And this, of course, goes very much to the leftist or Marxist argument that dysfunction, I guess what they would call immorality, but dysfunction arises from a lack of resources. You know, well, if you grow up poor, they completely ignore the Appalachian Mountains, which are very poor and have incredibly low crime rates. And then, of course, the great temptation is you say, well, if it's poverty that causes crime, of course, Dennis, what we need to do is take from the rich and give to the poor, and that way we'll eliminate poverty. But that strips free will from the rich in terms of charity, and it strips free will from the poor, making them the last domino that falls down in a bloody heap of crime based on all the previous materialistic dominoes that occurred before. And that means no morality. You know, the one great thing about Christianity is how it talks about the devil and temptations and fallen humanity that puts you on guard against your worst self. And if you're not on guard against your worst self and you have that kind of power, I think it's a real slippery slope.
Many, many people over the years have provided really great responses to these kinds of arguments, and one can point out that many of the Ten Commandments predate the Bible, like in the Code of Hammurabi, and you could point to the fact that the least religious countries are in fact the countries with the lowest murder rates, the highest levels of altruism, and the lowest levels of corporal punishment, which I think Stefan in particular should be particularly in favor of.
Well, the data seems to be pretty clear that if you're raised peacefully as a child, raised reasonably as a child, not hit, not screamed at, not yelled at, not neglected, then you're going to grow up to be a good person with empathy and so on.
These facts do a good job of demonstrating good without God, I think, but of course they could just say, as we've already seen, that even if secular nations have morality, it's only a leftover from their religious Judeo-Christian roots, or as Peterson thinks, that they're actually secret Christians.
But I can tell you that I actually don't believe in a God, and I could write poetry.
But you act like you do.
Huh?
But you act like you do. That's why you didn't want to throw poor Sam off the stage.
No, now you're making a claim. Okay, so I'm telling you I don't believe there's a God, and your response to that is, I really do, because I have a moral sense. But my moral sense is utterly without any appeal to a God.
Explicitly.
Or implicitly.
Maybe. That's not so obvious.
For this, I have a philosophical response to religious morality. These guys claim that religion provides a solid, objective source of morality. It doesn't, and I'll demonstrate it like this. As someone with a secular code of ethics, I say that the aim of morality is to reduce suffering in conscious creatures. The religious apologist usually responds, why should we care about reducing suffering? Why is that good? Says who? Without God, you can't say that suffering is bad, that's just your opinion. To this I would respond, why should we follow the word of God? To which the apologist would say, because he's God, and if you don't listen to him, he'll send you to hell, where you'll burn for eternity. To which I would say, why should I care about burning for eternity? To which the apologist says, because you'll suffer. To which I could reply, why should I care about suffering? You see, if religious apologists can't agree that reducing suffering is a perfectly good place to begin reasoning about morality, then why should the threat of hell be any better? What is hell but the threat of suffering for not being ethical? You could say that, but hell is the worst suffering and it goes on forever. But I don't think this changes much. You see, both the religious person and the atheist are on the same footing when it comes to morality. Both need to start from the position that reducing and preventing suffering are the goal, hell or no hell, and there is no objective, rational basis for that premise. I would argue that, in real life, ethics should revolve around reducing unnecessary suffering for all, as much as possible, without having to violate the rights of individuals. So, in the thought experiment where a doctor could kill a homeless man and extract his organs to save the lives of 3 other patients, taking the homeless man's organs would be the wrong thing to do, even though it would seem to have a net positive effect for the 3 other people who get to live. Doing that would actually cause a net negative, because then everyone else in society has to live with the fear that one day their organs may get harvested without their consent. This would, however, mean that ethics that only rely on religious reasoning that don't contribute to overall well-being need to go. For example, we could get rid of the Hindu practice of sati, where a widow's expected to die in her husband's funeral pyre to demonstrate her devotion to him. This practice is entirely rooted in religious logic, and it causes a net negative in well-being, and under a secular code of ethics, this could rationally be said to be immoral, from the standpoint of reducing unnecessary suffering. On a less serious note, the practice of not being able to do any work on the Sabbath because of Jewish tradition can go as well. Now, the arguments I just presented are all fine and good, but I think that the most damning argument against the new right deriving their morality from Judaism and Christianity is the fact that the morality in the Bible is nothing like the morality that they advocate for. In fact, the Bible promotes abortion in the case of infidelity. You see, in the Bible, there's a thing called the ordeal of the bitter water, and if a woman was suspected of cheating on her husband and becoming pregnant, she was to be taken to a priest. The priest would take the dirt off the floor of the tabernacle, mix it with water, and make the woman drink it. If this caused her to miscarry, as in abort, then that means that the baby was conceived with another man. If she didn't miscarry, then it's fine, because the baby belongs to the woman and her husband. This is in Numbers chapter 5, which should apply to both the Jewish and Christian faiths. The Bible also lays out the rules for buying and owning slaves, from Leviticus chapter 25, verse 44. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. You may bequeath them to your children as inherited property and can make them slaves for life, but you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. In Exodus chapter 21, verse 20 and 21, slave owners are permitted to beat their slaves so as long as they don't die in a few days. And earlier in the same chapter, the rules for selling your daughter into slavery are laid out. However, it isn't just the nasty stuff in the Bible that should give conservatives pause. Let's go over something that Stephen Molyneux said back there.
When you take out the certainty about property rights, when you take out the certainty of free will and self-ownership, when you ascribe all human causality to environmental factors, then you turn into this almost satanic manipulator of the environment in order to create the perfect human.
Private property, eh? You see, Stephen is a free market libertarian defending Christianity, which is a strange position to take because it doesn't seem like Jesus and his apostles would be entirely on board with that. From Acts chapter 4, and the multitude of those who believed were of one heart and one soul. Neither said any one of them that any of the things which he possessed was his own, but that they had all things in common. And with great power the apostles gave witness to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them all. Neither was there among them any that lacked, for as many as were possessors of lands or houses sold them, and brought the prices of the things that were sold, and laid them down at the apostles' feet. And distribution was made unto every man according as he had need. From Matthew chapter 6, no man can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one or love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Matthew 19:24. Again I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God. Now you'd think with all this kind of stuff in the Bible, these guys would be a lot more sympathetic towards efforts to create economic equality, or what they would call socialism. And by the way, this isn't just me trying to take the Bible out of context, as I'm sure some will say. There are many Christians who have looked at the verses I just presented and became full-on socialists. One example is a guy named Francis Bellamy, a self-proclaimed socialist Christian preacher, who also wrote the Pledge of Allegiance. You see, Bellamy's views were inspired by what he read in the Bible, and he championed the rights of working people and the equal distribution of economic resources, which he believed was inherent in the teachings of Jesus. In 1891, Bellamy was forced from his Boston pulpit for preaching against the evils of capitalism, and eventually stopped attending church altogether after moving to Florida, reportedly because of the racism he witnessed there. So why am I telling you all this? Well, the new right abhors socialism.
Socialism produces far more selfish individuals and a far more selfish society than a free market economy does. And once this widespread selfishness catches on, it is almost impossible to undo it.
And this, of course, goes very much to the leftist or Marxist argument that dysfunction, I guess what they would call immorality, but dysfunction arises from a lack of resources. You know, well, if you grow up poor, they completely ignore the Appalachian Mountains, which are very poor and have incredibly low crime rates. And then, of course, the great temptation is you say, well, if it's poverty that causes crime, of course, then what we need to do is take from the rich and give to the poor, and that way we'll eliminate poverty. But that strips free will from the rich in terms of charity, and it strips free will from the poor, making them the last domino that falls down in a bloody heap of crime based on all the previous materialistic dominoes that occurred before.
Remember, these are the same guys who are pointing to the Bible, or just the Old Testament in the case of Shapiro and Prager, for an objective source of morality. If you can read the Bible and come out in favor of free market capitalism and private property, while others read the same book and come out as raging socialists, you do not have an objective solid source for deriving your morality. All you have is a moral Rorschach test. Part 3. Values and meaning. This is another area where the supposed value of religion comes up a lot. The fact that religion offers an afterlife, and an afterlife gives us meaning for our lives, and that without meaning, we also lose values along with all of the other things that make life great.
There's a crisis of meaning that is happening among young people. That crisis of meaning is directly related to loss of religion in the United States. There is no doubt about this. Okay, the suicide rates have tripled among young people in the United States between 2006 and 2016. There's a reason for this. Right now, young American children growing up in the freest, most prosperous country in the history of mankind are killing themselves at record rates. And this is happening for a very specific reason. It is happening because we are not providing them meaning. And I don't mean the people in this room, really, because I think all of us spend our lives trying to figure out how we provide that meaning for our kids. I mean, our culture is militantly opposed to us providing that meaning for our children. They're supposed to find meaning in whatever the social justice buzzword of the day is. They're supposed to find meaning in the idea that they get to define their own meaning, that their morality is above God's morality, that there is no transcendent truth, there is just the truth that's inside of you, there's just your truth. All religious people know there is a difference between your truth, which is just called what you're feeling like today, and the truth, which has nothing to do with you and comes from a higher place. Most of human history, most of Western civilization is built on a quest to uncover these transcendental truths. Whether you're talking about Revelation at Sinai, or whether you're talking about the words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, or whether you're talking about the search for God that was posited by Aristotle and Plato, the search for something higher, the search for something transcendental. Even Marxism is an attempt to find a transcendental truth in all the wrong places. Human beings need transcendental truths. And if we do not find those, if we are not allowed to teach real transcendental truths to our children, if we are not allowed to teach meaning to our children, they will find meaning in some of the worst places they possibly can. That is the history of the 20th century.
But I do know this. My belief in God and the afterlife keeps me sane. The thought that this life is all there is means that torturers get away with the horrors they have engaged in. It means that this life is random and pointless. And it means that I will never again see anyone I love. This would drive me mad. In fact, I don't see how it wouldn't drive anyone mad who cares about suffering and who loves anyone.
They would be afraid of what we would lose if we lost religion. And I basically said, demonstrate to me any benefit.
Oh, you'd lose art and poetry and drama and narrative and story.
Are there no godless artists and poets?
Well, there are artists and poets who think they're godless.
So, the issue of meaning and purpose is not something that I take lightly. Like a lot of people, I have spent a lot of time thinking about the meaning of life, and I was raised religiously, so I understand how the religious would think that an afterlife and a God would offer an objective meaning to life. I could spend a lot of time here talking philosophy and stuff, but for now, I'll just answer the concerns that the new right have raised as directly as I can. And this might surprise you when you hear it, but I'll explain. Even if there is a God and an afterlife, there is no objective meaning to life. I think that even atheists might be surprised at what I just said, but if you think that the existence of a God would give life objective meaning, I have to ask this. Why does God say that the meaning of life is the meaning of life? For example, let's say that God says the meaning of life is to follow his commands and worship him, as is commonly stated by the religious. So, the issue of meaning and purpose is not something that I take lightly. Like a lot of people, I have spent a lot of time thinking about the meaning of life, and I was raised religiously, so I understand how the religious would think that an afterlife and a God would offer an objective meaning to life. I could spend a lot of time here talking philosophy and stuff, but for now, I'll just answer the concerns that the new right have raised as directly as I can. And this might surprise you when you hear it, but I'll explain. Even if there is a God and an afterlife, there is no objective meaning to life. I think that even atheists might be surprised at what I just said, but if you think that the existence of a God would give life objective meaning, I have to ask this. Why does God say that the meaning of life is the meaning of life? For example, let's say that God says the meaning of life is to follow his commands and worship him, as is commonly stated by the religious. First of all, I think this is a terrible meaning to life, and it seems meaningless just on its own, but if this was the meaning of life, we have to ask, why does God say so? Why does he say that this is the meaning to life? Because he just decided it was, arbitrarily? Or did he derive the meaning of life through a process of reasoning? This is a variation of the famous Euthyphro dilemma, which goes, does God say that certain actions are good because they're good, or are they good because God says so? You see, for the religious person, there's a big problem here. If the meaning to life is given by God, then there are only two logical choices. Either God says that that's the meaning of life because of his own arbitrary whims, or he reasoned his way to derive the meaning of life. So, religious people might be tempted to say that the latter option is better, but if God reasoned his way to the meaning of life, we have to ask if the logic that God used is something that God has to conform to, or if God can change the laws of logic to be whatever he wants them to be. If God used a process of reasoning that he has to obey, then he's no longer omnipotent. And now we have to investigate the higher logic that God is subject to. But if God can change the laws of logic to be whatever he wants them to be, the meaning of life is arbitrary. You see, I could have argued against the new right on this by pointing out that us secular folk have plenty of meaning in our lives, that we get fulfillment out of community, helping others, advancing the species, etc. But that's all true, but I think that the better rebuttal is to point out that the religious, just like with morality, are in the exact same place as the rest of us. If the religious want to say that their meaning of life is given by God, then their meaning to life either makes God subject to some law of reasoning that's above him, meaning he's no longer omnipotent, and if the religious won't accept that possibility, that means that the meaning of life given by God is as arbitrary as anything we could come up with. Finally, for the sake of argument, let's say that what the religious people here are saying is true, that God gives us meaning and that the meaning is true. Well, let's hear it from someone who works with Ben Shapiro.
The answer is 42. That's the meaning of life. Some other meanings of life, my reaction is just to give glory to God. That is as basic as you could say it. The Westminster Shorter Catechism, I have learned, agrees with that. They say man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, whether therefore ye eat or drink or whatsoever you do all to the glory of God. That's simple.
So apparently the meaning of life is to give glory to God. Am I the only one who finds this completely meaningless? What's the meaning of endlessly worshipping another being? To what end does a supposedly omnipotent being need worship for? And even if we live on forever in heaven for doing so, what's the point of living forever without any kind of struggle? Forever and ever. Is there any point to that? By the way, supposedly there's no sin in heaven, so will there be free will in heaven? Will we be free to do as we wish? And if God somehow makes it so that we suddenly have no desire to sin in heaven, is that still us? Or is it just a facsimile of us? Food for thought. Now, like I said, the topic of meaning and purpose is something that I've thought about a lot, and so have some of the greatest philosophers in history. The existentialists, people like Kierkegaard, Sartre, Camus, and Nietzsche, have written what I find to be incredibly helpful thoughts on the subject. If you want, in the description I'll provide links to video introductions to these philosophers made by a channel called The School of Life. These are very helpful videos that condense the work of the thinkers I just mentioned into quick, easy to understand, and thought-provoking videos. I'll also provide my own thoughts on this topic near the end of the video, but first, I want to sum up everything we just went through because at the root of all this, I think that there is a very political motive that is driving all of the people who I have mentioned in this video. Part 4. What it's all about. Now, after listening to the people in this video defend religion so vigorously, you might be surprised that most of them actually express difficulties in defending the reality of religion. Take a listen.
I mean, intellectually, the position of atheism is very hard to assail. Because you have to go with faith, and if you have an empirical, rational view of the universe, faith doesn't cut it. Faith is, I'm right. Closing your eyes and saying that you're seeing something different is not the same as being scientific. So intellectually, atheism is a very, very easy position. And again, metaphysically, epistemologically, it's really hard to sustain the argument for religion, but...
And then I said, it's very interesting. You look at yourselves, you atheists, as, we, unlike the religious, we question. But I want you to know, I said, I don't know a religious person who has never had doubts. You never have doubts, but we acknowledge when we have them. So who's more open to questions?
I believe that in the end, Western civilization is based on a foundation of Judeo-Christian morality that is religious in nature, but I can't just say God. Like when people ask me a question, I can't just say God if I want to have the argument. Maybe at the root, if you say free will, when you get down to the root argument of a couple of these major things, then I will have to say God. Okay. But I think that the vast majority of political argument, it's important not to just cite to the Bible or to a deity.
So if religion is so hard to defend factually, why bother doing all the mental gymnastics to try and defend it? Of course, the obvious reason is for all the things we just talked about. These people want an easy source for their morality, meaning, and a reason to believe in free will. However, these aren't reasons for believing something, they're reasons to want to believe something. Remember, these are the same people who keep hammering home the message that feelings are irrelevant to the truth. Don't use your feelings to decide what's true.
So, yeah, feelings really matter. Getting along with people really matter. People liking you really matters, evolutionarily speaking, when you're a woman. I get it. That's important. You know what doesn't matter? You know what doesn't care about your feelings? A fucking grizzly bear does not care about your feelings. Oh, you know what else doesn't care about your feelings? Falling off a cliff, doesn't care about your feelings because you were chasing a gazelle and you weren't looking ahead fast enough. Oh, you know what else doesn't care about your feelings? Tripping and breaking your leg in a gopher hole because you weren't stepping carefully enough. And then what people do is they just club you on the head because you're too heavy to carry back to camp. You know what else doesn't care about your feelings? War! War doesn't care about your feelings. Oh, the other tribe.
What is it that Margaret Thatcher said, facts are conservative? Mm-hmm. I would go totally correct. There's another thing that makes you conservative. Common sense. People write to me, it's one of the most common reactions I've gotten in my long career. God, Dennis, whatever you say, it just sounds like common sense. I said, that's exactly right. I'm a conservative because I use common sense. It's not that I have a pre-existing ideological bent. If you look at life as with common sense, you end up with conservative answers.
So if facts don't care about your feelings and religion is very hard to defend factually, why bother defending it? Well, one reason may be that these people actually care a lot more about feelings than they're willing to let on, but I think there's another reason they defend religion so much. It's a reason that's a lot more relevant to earthly matters like their politics and their careers. Let me explain. The New Right consistently defends a worldview that places an imminent focus on the individual. This can be good in some cases, but a lot of the time, it justifies very harmful ways of looking at the world. To see what I mean, let's listen to some clips from earlier.
There's no I in the secular world. I is a euphemism for environment and genes. That's it. There is no I. That's the reason, by the way, that folks who believe that really don't want to punish criminals, because in their heart, they don't believe they're responsible for what they did.
Right. Because in the Christian worldview and in religious worldviews in general, even if you come from a harsh background, you still have a direct channel to the divine. You still have a direct channel to universal morality.
And you're still responsible. You can't rape a woman and say, well, my parents were bad parents. It may be the case, but a lot of people have bad parents and don't rape and don't torture and don't murder and so on. And the Islamist butcher out there, the terrorist, they come overwhelmingly from middle class and upper class families. Even though the New York Times writers constantly speak about poverty in the Arab world as a major fuel of terror, the truth is it has nothing to do. Islamic terror has nothing to do with poverty.
Oh, no.
You see, the new right wants to live in a certain kind of world. Not just a world with easy answers to big problems, but a world where there's a clear good side and a clear bad side.
They didn't hate communism. They hated Reagan more than Brezhnev. I said, I can't be here. I hate evil. They don't hate evil. The left doesn't hate evil. The left hates carbon emissions.
You heard it yourself, that Prager said,
even though the New York Times writers constantly speak about poverty in the Arab world as a major fuel of terror, the truth is it has nothing to do. Islamic terror has nothing to do with poverty.
Now, before we go on, you need to know that both Prager and Shapiro supported the Iraq War. The Iraq War killed anywhere from 100,000 to 600,000 civilians. That's only including violent deaths, by the way, not to mention all of the homes and property that were destroyed. As you can imagine, this kind of antagonism proves to be very useful in jihadist propaganda. If you want to believe that all of those dead civilians and all these destroyed lives have nothing to do with Islamic violence, and that Islamic terrorists are just violent out of their own free will, I don't know what to tell you. The thing is, Prager and his ilk really do believe this. The reason they believe this is because they want to live in a world where problems are easily divided into a clash between the good side and the evil side, like the Star Wars universe. In this world, all of the things that the new right grew up believing must be true. One of these beliefs is that America is the best and is even morally superior.
Conservatives view America as President Abraham Lincoln viewed it, as the last best hope of Earth. While acknowledging America's flaws, conservatives regard America as the best society ever created, giving more people of more backgrounds, more freedom, more opportunity, and more affluence than any other society, and doing more good for more people in other countries than any society in history.
You see, in order to say something like poverty has nothing to do with Islamic violence, there are certain things you need to believe. In no particular order, you need to believe that people can somehow overcome cause and effect with sheer will. You need to believe that good and evil are objective aspects of the universe, and that your side, America in this case, is good by definition, and that if America is attacked by jihadists, it cannot be considered any kind of retaliation, because that would imply a wrongdoing on America's part. It must be because jihadists are just evil, and they chose to be evil, free from outside influences. That way, you can avoid having to introspect about your own actions, and you are free to despise the other. You can ignore the complex matrix of influences that created the jihadist and reduce it all down to him being evil. By the way, I'm not saying that Islamic violence is all America's fault either. It's not, and part of the blame does fall on Islam itself. But if you're going to be stubborn enough to believe that Islamic violence also has nothing at all to do with poverty, or the effects of an offensive war waged by American forces, you are not helping the situation. Now, we applied the religious right-wing view to explain their thoughts on jihadism, but it actually explains the right-wing view on a lot of other things as well. For example, we don't have to help the poor because they have the free will to just work themselves out of poverty. The shrinking middle class isn't the result of stagnating wages and increasing costs of living, it's just because they're more lazy. If black people are targeted by the police more, it's because they just commit more crimes. Gay people shouldn't be allowed to marry because they can just choose who they're attracted to. Rich people shouldn't be taxed because they're only on top because they're the best, and not because they were born into a privileged family who could send them to a good school. It's because we live in a meritocracy where everyone at the top is the most hardworking and virtuous and the poor are just the most lazy and unskilled. For the most part, the right-wing thesis in America is to ignore the complex systems that all of us live in and are affected by and reduce one's place in life down to the individual. This is a very easy way of looking at the world. This is a world where everyone does what they do out of the goodness or evil of their heart. When things go wrong, punish the individual and just move on. The difference between the right wing and us lefty types who want to reform a lot of large systems in society is that we understand the cause and effect principle applied to people and psychology, And we understand that the best way to enact positive change is to mold systems to reinforce the desired behavior. Don't want to be murdered? Then mold a society where the punishment for murder is severe, and a society where it is as hard as possible to get away with murder. Want to live in a society without Islamic violence? Create a society where no one has anything to gain from joining an extremist group, and create a secular society where Islamic beliefs are no longer taken seriously. While the right wing describes this tendency for social engineering as authoritarian, the only answer they have to vast social problems is moral posturing, finger pointing at the oppressed, and shaming. Black people stop committing crimes, poor people work harder, jihadists stop being evil. Well, conservatives, how's that working out for you? As a secular person, I have struggled with a lot of the issues that were raised here. Free will, morality, meaning, etc. I thought I'd take a moment here to share my thoughts on these issues and how I came to my conclusions without religion. First, I don't believe in libertarian free will the way that most religious people do. However, this doesn't bother me in the slightest, and the reason why is, well, first of all, like I said, if there is a God as described by Judaism and Christianity, we have even less free will than even in a deterministic universe, but even though we don't have free will, I think we can still have the freest will worth wanting. What do I mean by this? The kind of free will I think we have is a free will where we can make our own decisions and come to our own conclusions based on the knowledge and experience that we have, as in decisions and conclusions that were not forced on us by larger powers. This is a position on free will sometimes known as compatibilism. This is the difference between someone picking vegetables in a garden in their own backyard versus someone picking vegetables on a plantation because they're being whipped by their slave owner. One is acting under their own agency, and the other is not. Now, neither one is exempt from the deterministic nature of the universe, but this is actually a good thing. Think about it. In order to have libertarian free will, you need the ability to reason independently from reason or constraint. You need to be able to think of things for absolutely no reason. If you pay attention to your mind, I think you'll find that this never happens. Even if you think of something completely random right now as a response to that challenge, like a unicorn, you only thought of that because my challenge prompted you to try and think of something random, and what you thought of may have been different depending on the last book you read or the last movie you saw or anything else that's affected you. The very fact that reason and logic work under rigid mechanistic ways is the reason why we don't have libertarian free will, but this is a good thing. This means that we live in a universe that follows a logic that we can then understand. Libertarian free will, if you think about it, brings an end to rationality. So even if we don't have ultimate free will, don't worry, because humanity has gotten to a point where most of us can act and think under our own accord, based on our own beliefs and knowledge. To me, that's the freest will worth wanting. As for morality, for me, this isn't really that big of an issue. I've never lived in poverty, so I've never had to break the law to survive, and as the old saying goes, I've killed and raped all the people I want to kill and rape, which is 0. But of course, to this, people usually respond with,
well, to me, atheist ethics is like, it's like diets for thin people. Yeah. I mean, if you're already thin,
well, I guess
you don't need the diet.
They would say it's enlightenment values.
Well, okay, but they can say enlightenment values, but the reason we need ethics are for people who really want to do evil. You don't, I mean, you're a nice guy, I'm a nice guy, we're not sitting there going, okay, there's a homeless guy, there's a cinder block, I could go drop the cinder block. We don't have those impulses, so for me, I don't have to fight this demonic lust for, you know what, but there are people out there who really want that, and the fear of the devil and the fear of hell and the fear of eternal damnation kept those people in check.
I'm actually not so interested in coming up with moral rules as found in the Bible as I'm concerned with how we can create a society that promotes these rules. Anyone can come up with rules like don't kill and don't steal. I think we're all on board with that, but the important thing is creating a society where people don't feel the need to do those things, and making sure that the ones who do will have as hard a time as possible doing so. And of course, creating this ideal society is really one of the main points of politics, isn't it? If you want to learn more about secular ethics, Matt Dillahunty has made some really great videos on this topic, and I'll include links to these videos in the description. Now, as for meaning, this is something I've thought about a lot, so I think I can offer some interesting thoughts on it. Like I said, there is no objective meaning to life, whether there's a God or not. But that doesn't mean that life is meaningless by any means. You see, meaning and purpose are subjective qualities by definition. They cannot be intrinsic properties of the universe. They are qualities that are imbued onto things by thinking agents. In the case of the universe, that's us. I would argue that the most basic purpose to life that we all share is just being alive and existing, but beyond that, you're free to come up with your own purpose. But of course, the religious response is usually, but why should I? If I'm just gone when I die, what's the point? Eventually, all my works will be forgotten, so what difference does it make? If what I do now doesn't matter forever, and there's no afterlife, there's no point. Of course, I disagree with this statement, but you might be surprised that I absolutely believe that what we do matters, even if no one remembers our names and nothing we create is remembered either. You see, this is where cause and effect come back into play. Let's use an example. Let's say that you stumble across a self-help book that teaches you how to be happy, and one of the things the book teaches is that giving to other people makes people happy. So you go on with your life, but recommend the book to a friend who happens to be feeling a little down and purposeless. Your friend reads the book and they're inspired to be just a little bit more charitable. This results in them giving just $1 more to feed the hungry than they would have if they didn't read the book. This extra dollar helps feed a poor person and keep them going for one more day. Through the charitable efforts of many others who also gave, this poor person would work their way up and eventually make a living for themselves. Because of their experience with poverty, they're much more motivated to help the poor, and they lead a life of philanthropy that ends up helping thousands, and those thousands later on to individually help even more people. Now, the thousands of people that are helped in small ways here and there may not even know your name, but the fact is, in this scenario, the simple act of recommending a book created a cascading effect that touched thousands, and this chain effect will go on through history long after your name is forgotten. Even if no one knows who you are 1,000 years from now, you will still live on through even the smallest effects that you have. Everyone who lived, struggled, and died before us live on through each and every single one of us, and we will live on through the humanity that comes after us. Now, I made that example up on the spot, but this principle applies to everything we do. We all know about the butterfly effect and the fear that if we travel back in time and change a tiny thing, we'll end up completely changing the course of history, like accidentally helping the Nazis win World War II or something, but we seldom think that what we do now can have a huge impact on the future. For me, this gives my life all the meaning I could ask for. I believe that together, the potential for humanity is practically infinite, and I think that we could reach that potential through a million different venues, through everything we do. You might not directly contribute to medicine yourself, but if you do something small, like deliver a food to an employee working at a hospital so they can save some time and devote it to treating a patient, in my eyes, you contributed to the well-being of that doctor's patients. Beethoven's favorite food was apparently mac and cheese, and I would say that the people who served him it at a restaurant did their part to contribute to music. In the same way, if my videos do a little bit to inspire some people to think more clearly or be more tolerant or something, then that would give me a lot of fulfillment. The universe may not care about us, but we do, and I think that's enough. Of course, everything I just said is kind of complicated, and I can imagine it's still not enough for some people, and they would still want to cling to the easy answers that religion provides. There is one point regarding all of this that I haven't brought up yet, which is facts don't care about your feelings. No matter what you want, reality is the same. All of the arguments for religion here have only argued from the basis that whether or not it's true, we need religion in our lives and societies, but really I hope that I've made the case that the benefits that religion provides are actually illusory, and that they only benefit the kind of society that right-wingers want. Vindictive, moralistic, in favor of those already in power, and ignorant of complex systems. Ultimately, religion is ill-equipped to handle the moral issues that are coming in the future. What is Judaism and Christianity's position on cloning? On life extension? AI? Mind uploading? Space colonization? I think that conservatism clings on to religion because they both share one crucial thing in common. They both look to the past for their answers instead of the future. And you know what's especially ironic? While doing research for this episode, I found this clip that Dennis Prager made. Funny, right? And those thousands go on to individually help even more people. Definition: they cannot be intrinsic properties of the universe. They are qualities that are imbued onto things by thinking agents. In the case of the universe, that's us. I would argue that the most basic purpose to life that we all share is just being alive and existing, but beyond that, you're free to come up with your own purpose. But of course, the religious response is usually, but why should I? If I'm just gone when I die, what's the point? Eventually all my works will be forgotten, so what difference does it make? If what I do now doesn't matter forever, and there's no afterlife, there's no point. Of course, I disagree with this statement, but you might be surprised that I absolutely believe that what we do matters, even if no one remembers our names and nothing we create is remembered either. You see, this is where cause and effect come back into play. Let's use an example. Let's say that you stumble across a self-help book that teaches you how to be happy, and one of the things the book teaches is that giving to other people makes people happy. So you go on with your life, but recommend the book to a friend who happens to be feeling a little down and purposeless. Your friend reads the book and they're inspired to be just a little bit more charitable. This results in them giving just $1 more to feed the hungry than they would have if they didn't read the book. This extra dollar helps feed a poor person and keep them going for one more day. Through the charitable efforts of many others who also gave, this poor person would work their way up and eventually make a living for themselves. Because of their experience with poverty, they're much more motivated to help the poor, and they lead a life of philanthropy that ends up helping thousands, and those thousands go on to individually help even more people. Now, the thousands of people that are helped in small ways here and there may not even know your name, but the fact is, in this scenario, the simple act of recommending a book created a cascading effect that touched thousands, and this chain effect will go on through history long after your name is forgotten. Even if no one knows who you are 1,000 years from now, you will still live on through even the smallest effects that you have. Everyone who lived, struggled, and died before us live on through each and every single one of us, and we will live on through the humanity that comes after us. Now, I made that example up on the spot, but this principle applies to everything we do. We all know about the butterfly effect and the fear that if we travel back in time and change a tiny thing, we'll end up completely changing the course of history, like accidentally helping the Nazis win World War II or something, but we seldom think that what we do now can have a huge impact on the future. For me, this gives my life all the meaning I could ask for. I believe that together, the potential for humanity is practically infinite, and I think that we can reach that potential through a million different venues, through everything we do. You might not directly contribute to medicine yourself, but if you do something small, like deliver a food to an employee working at a hospital so they can save some time and devote it to treating a patient, in my eyes, you contributed to the well-being of that doctor's patients. Beethoven's favorite food was apparently mac and cheese, and I would say that the people who served him it at a restaurant did their part to contribute to music. In the same way, if my videos do a little bit to inspire some people to think more clearly or be more tolerant or something, then that would give me a lot of fulfillment. The universe may not care about us, but we do, and I think that's enough. Of course, everything I just said is kind of complicated, and I can imagine it's still not enough for some people, and they would still want to cling to the easy answers that religion provides. There is one point regarding all of this that I haven't brought up yet, which is facts don't care about your feelings. No matter what you want, reality is the same. All of the arguments for religion here have only argued from the basis that whether or not it's true, we need religion in our lives and societies, but really I hope that I've made the case that the benefits that religion provides are actually illusory, and that they only benefit the kind of society that right-wingers want. Vindictive, moralistic, in favor of those already in power, and ignorant of complex systems. Ultimately, religion is ill-equipped to handle the moral issues that are coming in the future. What is Judaism and Christianity's position on cloning? On life extension? AI? Mind uploading? Space colonization? I think that conservatism clings on to religion because they both share one crucial thing in common. They both look to the past for their answers instead of the future. And you know what's especially ironic? While doing research for this episode, I found this clip that Dennis Prager made.
At the core of left-wing thought is a denial of painful realities, the denial of what the French call les faits de la vie, facts of life. Conservatives, on the other hand, are all too aware of the painful realities of life and base many of their positions on them.
Funny, right? Wow, I think this turned out to be a lot longer than my first two videos and a lot more intense intellectually as well. I'm definitely going to need to do something lighter after this one to decompress. So, I've only had 2 videos up before this one, but I've got nearly 30 subscribers from those 2. I'm expecting to hit 100 very soon, and I really wanted to do a 100 subscriber Q&A for you guys. In the description, I'll include a link to my Curious Cat where you'll be able to submit questions, and I'll answer them in the Q&A video. I know that most people usually wait for 1,000 subscribers or more to do a Q&A special, but I really want to communicate to you guys that I really appreciate all of your early support. You know, I don't just only care after I reach a modest success. You know, all of my subscribers matter to me. So I look forward to putting that out, and stay tuned for more. There's no shortage of bad arguments to get to, so there's plenty to do. See ya.